If you talk to someone who grew up in the 1970s long enough, eventually you'll notice it. Not in their stories, not in what they claim to have endured, but in how they respond when things go wrong. Stress doesn't rattle them the way you expect. Disappointment lands, but it doesn't knock them over. They carry uncertainty with a kind of quiet steadiness that feels almost out of place today. They don't explain it. They don't label it. Most of the time, they don't even recognize it as survival. It was just life, and they learned how to stand inside it without asking for attention. That steadiness didn't come from being told they were strong. No one sat them down and praised their resilience. Strength wasn't framed as something special or admirable. It was assumed. You were expected to handle things, to manage yourself, to get through whatever was in front of you without turning it into a conversation. If you struggled, you did it privately. If you succeeded, you moved on. There wasn't much room for self-celebration or emotional commentary. Life didn't pause to ask how you were holding up, so you learned not to wait for that pause. Many of their parents carried memories that never fully made it into words. Economic uncertainty, political tension, the long shadow of war or its aftermath, even if it happened somewhere else. That awareness lived in the background of daily life. Food was on the table, but it wasn't taken for granted.
Money existed, but it was watched carefully. Things were repaired instead of replaced. There was a quiet respect for what you had, because you understood, even as a child, that it could disappear. That kind of environment teaches restraint without ever naming it. You learn patience not because someone explains its value, but because impatience doesn't change anything. Over time, that mindset seeps into how you handle emotions too. Feelings were felt deeply, but mostly alone. You could be anxious without knowing that word. You could be exhausted without calling it burnout. There wasn't a shared language for inner turmoil, so you didn't externalize it. You internalized it. You learned to keep going while carrying discomfort, assuming that everyone else was doing the same. Strength became synonymous with endurance, not understanding. You didn't ask what the feeling meant. You asked whether you could still function with it present. Help wasn't something you reached for easily, partly because it didn't seem available in a meaningful way. Institutions felt rigid and distant. Authority existed, but it didn't explain itself. Systems weren't designed to bend around individual needs. If something wasn't working, the solution usually involved adapting yourself, not questioning the structure. That trains a particular kind of self-reliance, not the confident, self-affirming kind we talk about now, but a quieter version where you assume responsibility by default. If there's a problem, it must be yours to solve. Even boredom played a role in shaping this strength. Long afternoons stretched on without supervision, without screens, without constant stimulation. You stared at walls. You wandered outside.
You learned to sit with restlessness until it softened into imagination or acceptance. There was no immediate escape from discomfort, so your mind learned how to tolerate it. That ability doesn't look impressive on the surface, but it becomes invaluable later in life. It's the capacity to be alone with your thoughts without panicking, to endure emptiness without filling it impulsively. Rules were another constant, and they rarely came with explanations. You were told what to do, not why it mattered to you emotionally. Obedience was expected, and when it wasn't possible, quiet defiance was the only alternative. There wasn't much space for negotiation or validation. That environment teaches you that expressing yourself doesn't change outcomes. Endurance does. So you endure. You comply or you resist silently. But either way, you learn to hold your reactions inside. Failure, when it happened, left a mark. Mistakes weren't softened with reassurance. Consequences weren't reframed as learning experiences in real time. You felt the weight of getting something wrong, sometimes through shame, sometimes through loss of trust, sometimes through tangible punishment. And then you adjusted. You didn't linger. You didn't process it out loud. You absorbed it and moved forward, carrying the lesson quietly. Over time, that builds a thick emotional skin, but it also teaches you to associate mistakes with personal responsibility rather than shared understanding. For many, physical needs were met with consistency. There was food, shelter, routine. But emotional availability varied widely. Some parents were loving but distant. Others were overwhelmed themselves. Reliability mattered more than reassurance. You knew what to expect in terms of structure, even if you didn't always feel seen within it. That creates a kind of stability that's solid but emotionally cool. You learn to value predictability over comfort, consistency over warmth. Community existed in a different way too. Neighborhoods felt alive. Schools and extended families created a sense of presence. You belonged somewhere, even if you didn't talk about how you felt within that belonging. Emotional intimacy wasn't the currency of connection. Showing up was. You fit in by not making waves, by understanding the unspoken rules, by knowing your place. Strength meant blending in, carrying your inner world quietly, while maintaining your role on the outside. Gender expectations shaped that strength further. Boys were trained, often subtly, to suppress emotion, to stay stoic, to equate vulnerability with weakness. Girls were trained to endure, to take on responsibility early, to keep things running smoothly regardless of how they felt. Strength wasn't about self-exploration, it was about fulfilling expectations. You became good at what was required of you, sometimes at the expense of knowing who you were beyond those roles. Life choices felt heavier back then. There were fewer options, and the ones you made were meant to last. Careers weren't endlessly reinvented. Marriages weren't framed as ongoing emotional negotiations. Locations weren't temporary chapters. Commitment carried weight. You stuck with decisions because leaving wasn't always feasible or socially supported. That kind of permanence builds a different kind of resilience, one rooted in endurance rather than flexibility. You learn to live with choices instead of constantly optimizing them. Responsibility arrived early. Children learned not to burden adults with their emotional needs. You figured things out on your own because that was what was modeled. Don't make it a problem became an internal rule. You learned to self-contain, to manage your inner world quietly so it didn't spill out and disrupt others. Over time, that becomes an identity. You're the one who handles things, the one who doesn't complain, the one who keeps it together. Humor often became the release valve. Dry, ironic, understated.
Pain expressed sideways, masked with wit. Jokes that carried more truth than direct statements ever could. Laughter softened the edges without exposing the core. It allowed connection without vulnerability, expression without confession. Strength hid behind humor, making it easier to carry and harder for others to see. Self-discovery was often delayed. Youth was about survival, compliance, responsibility. There wasn't much space for introspection or emotional reckoning. That work got postponed, sometimes until midlife, when the pace finally slowed enough for questions to surface. Who am I beyond what I've carried? What did I never get to feel? Those questions arrive quietly, often unexpectedly, and sometimes with surprising weight. Today, this kind of strength is frequently misunderstood. It doesn't perform vulnerability publicly. It doesn't ask to be validated. It doesn't share its story unless invited, and even then, it minimizes. From the outside, it can look like emotional distance or rigidity, but that interpretation misses something important. This strength wasn't formed through choice. It was formed through necessity. Resilience wasn't a skill they practiced. It became who they were. And that's where the tension lives. When strength becomes identity, it's hard to put down. You don't know where the resilience ends and you begin. You don't ask what it cost because cost implies an alternative, and alternatives didn't feel available at the time. But eventually, the weight makes itself known. In quiet moments, in exhaustion that doesn't lift, in a sense that you've carried more than anyone ever realized. This generation didn't lack depth or sensitivity. They carried it privately, without language or permission. They learned how to function, how to endure, how to stand steady in the face of uncertainty. And only now, as the world shifts and emotional expression becomes more visible, does the full weight of that quiet strength begin to surface. Not as regret necessarily, but as a realization that surviving without being seen still counts, and that even the strongest carriers deserve a place to finally set things down.